everyone, it's Tuesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. The 2023 FIFA Women's World Cup in Australia and New Zealand kicked off on July 20th. A total of 32 of the top national teams, divided into 8 groups, are competing for the trophy. South Korea is in Group H and had its first match this morning. Though they lost 2-0 to Colombia, more games are to come this Sunday and next Thursday. Meanwhile, more and more of Korea's male stars are joining big football clubs overseas, such as Lee Kang-in in Paris-Saint-Germain and Min-jae with Bayern Munich. What's behind this recognition of Korean players and what can we expect from them? To talk about this, we invite Paul Neat, Arirang's very own sports editor. Paul, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, and we also have football writer Steve Han. Steve, hi, thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me again. How's it going?
All right, thank you for being with us. Now, first question to our Paul. So, the 9th Women's World Cup kicked off last Thursday, and the tournament has been expanded from 24 to 32 countries. Now, what are other unique features of this 9th edition?
Well, yeah, like you said, it is 32 teams now. That makes it the biggest Women's World Cup ever. And it's different because it has co-hosts. It's 2 countries are hosting it, so 2 federations, New Zealand and, of course, Australia. It's the first to be held in the Southern Hemisphere as well, which should, in theory, give the hosts an advantage. But in terms of the history of how many teams played in the World Cup in the past, the first in 1991 only had 12 teams, and then 16 in 99, and then in 2015 it became 24. That means obviously with more teams there are new teams, 8 new teams in total. Haiti, Ireland are in there as well, Morocco, Panama, the Philippines, Portugal, Vietnam and Zambia. Philippines actually won their game earlier this evening, so they were the first team of this new batch of teams to record a win in this current World Cup. In terms of lasts, there are some lasts maybe. There are some legends of the game who will be retiring or ending their international careers after this World Cup. Megan Rapinoe, of course, of the USA, won the tournament 2 times. She said she will retire after this World Cup. And Marta of Brazil, one of the best of all time. She had an ACL injury before the tournament, managed to get fit just in time. She's played in 6, but she's never won the tournament so far. So she's one to keep an eye on. And Alex Morgan, again, of the USA, and Eugenie Le Sommer of France. So those are the players who might be saying farewell to their careers, or certainly for their national teams. And also, in terms of new things, there's more money. There's going to be more money divided up and paid out to the players. So I think it's going to be $110 million US, which is 3 times more than the last World Cup in 2019 and 7 times more than in 2015.
Right, so many interesting features. Now, Steve, so Tuesday, as far as I know, marks the last day of the World Cup's opening group games. What has been the highlight of the tournament so far?
I guess if I had to pick one game, I'll pick the Spain versus Costa Rica game, which Spain won 3-0. Not so much because it was a dramatic game, but it's actually because this game showed just how much improvement women's football has made from a qualitative standpoint in the last 4 to 8 years. It's worth remembering that 8 years ago, in 2015, Spain were victims of Korea's first ever win at a Women's World Cup. Korea beat Spain to advance to the last 16 in that tournament. But over the last 8 years since then, Spain has won the under-17 Women's World Cup. They've won the under-20 Women's World Cup. And their strongest club side, FC Barcelona, their women's side, have won the Women's Champions League 2 of the last 3 seasons. I think that just goes to show you how rapidly women's football has improved across the world over the last 8 years or so. So for us Koreans, we've got some catch-up to do.
All right, I see. Now, Paul, so this morning, South Korea played against Colombia, and unfortunately, they were beaten by 2-0. Now, what was your takeaway from the match?
Yeah, well, the jinx continues because Korea were looking to record their first group stage opener, a win in a group stage opener. Obviously, that hasn't happened. They were doing all right, I think, until the first goal. It was unlucky for Shim So-yeon with the handball for the penalty. A hand wasn't in an unnatural position, as they would say, but the rules are these days, if the ball does hit your hand in the box, it is a penalty. Good pen, keeper was sent the wrong way. One standout for me before the game was the starting 11, because the usual keeper, Kim Jong-mi, She was dropped and Yoon Young-gul played in goal instead. Now, Kim Jong-mi made some errors in the Asian Cup final last year that led to a comeback loss, really, if you will, from Korea winning 2-0, then lost 3-2 to China. So the manager, Colin Bell, clearly not sort of impressed or has lost a bit of faith in her. But then Yoon Young-gul made a mistake for the second goal, so it's all very, very unfortunate. So the result, obviously, it's not the way they wanted to start this World Cup, but they will feel a little bit unlucky that there's some, because they did start quite brightly. They had, I think, up until the first goal, 3 shots, 2 on target. So they were doing all right, and they were finding a rhythm. The penalty, that was a bit of a turning point. So, you know, now it's all about looking to Morocco. That, if they can, luckily, that game is next, not Germany, right? So if they can sort of get a win against Morocco, who are ranked 72nd in the world, then they've definitely got a chance. One bright spot though was Casey Fair for Korea. So she came on, and at 16 is the youngest player to feature in a Women's World Cup. So she came on for the last sort of 13 minutes. So hopefully we'll see more of her against Morocco.
Right, I see. Now, Steve, I'd like to ask you more on the upcoming schedule. So South Korea's other Group H opponents are, as we have already said, Morocco and Germany. And having been beaten in their World Cup opener, a result in their match with Morocco on July 30th is really vital. They then play Germany on August 3rd. Now, how do you expect these matches to go, and which players will South Korea need to be wary of?
Yeah, no, I think number one thing for Korea, they have their pride riding on the line over these next 2 games. And one thing that these 23 players who are at the World Cup, one thing that they have said almost in unison, you know, going into this World Cup was, we're responsible for women's football not being as popular in Korea. We feel responsible for that because as national team players, we simply haven't done well enough. And we have to do what we can to help more young girls play football in our country. You know, these are their words. So they're going to have to follow up on this. And, you know, for players like Ji So-yeon, Cho So-yeon, and Kim Hee-ri, you know, this is likely going to be their last World Cup. So this is not how they want to go out. And it's one thing to lose, but to look lethargic and defeated in a World Cup game like they did in today's game, it's quite devastating, honestly. So if they're really passionate about playing for young girls in Korea, now is clearly not the time to give up because you still got 2 more games to go. Right,
and much improvements is very needed right now. Now, Steve, one more question. So this is South Korea's 4th appearance at the Women's World Cup, and they've reached the round of 16 once before in 2015 in Canada, as far as I know. Now, how have the Taeguk ladies done in previous tournaments?
You know, let me preface what I'm about to say by stressing that I've got nothing but respect for these players, but I'll put it this way. You know, the notion within people in women's football in our country is that Korean women's football has improved, and I agree with that. That's completely true. But, you know, so give all the credit to our players, give all the credit to Colin Bell, give all the credit to the WK League, but here's my analogy on this. You know, 8 years ago, like I said, Korea beat Spain in the Women's World Cup. And we're saying that Korea has improved since then, which is true. But guess what? You know, Spain, who lost to Korea on that day, improved faster and they improved more. You know, and it's the same with England, France, Canada, Australia. You know, so improving in sports, you know, oftentimes it's not just about how much we have improved, because it's also about how much we've improved in comparison to the rest of the competition. And I think that's where Korea is falling short right now.
Right, I see. What you have just said, I think, is something that we need to really think about. Now, Paul, so I'd like to also tap on other teams as well. The U.S. is seeking a 3rd consecutive World Cup titles, and the Team USA will, could they make history as the first team ever, male or female, to win 3 World Cups in a row? I mean, and which teams could potentially upset this Team USA's goal?
Yeah, well, first of all, the USA, they've been so dominant over the years that they just have to be considered to be the favourites, and their odds only shortened as well after that win over Vietnam. But they're used to the big occasion. You know, they've done this before. There's a lot of these players that are still in this squad from the last squad and the World Cup before that. So they know when they get late into this tournament, they know what it takes to get over the line in sort of tight games and tense sort of atmospheres. And like Steve just said earlier about the sort of Cho So-yeon and Ji So-yeon in the Korea team, similar for the USA as well. Megan Rapinoe and Alex Morgan, they're going to want to go out having won another World Cup, and like you just said, set that record of 3 in a row. But there are probably a handful of other teams that could genuinely be contenders for this World Cup. Germany is one of them. Obviously, they're ranked number 2 in the world. They put 6 past Morocco yesterday, so that's obviously a statement of intent from them. France, too, they have Hervé Renard as their manager. Now, he was at the Men's World Cup just last year. He did a great job with Saudi Arabia. He obviously beat Argentina and got to the round of 16. He's very clear, very organised. I think that will help this France team. England too, of course. When you look at a team that has won the Euros beforehand, they have to be considered to be among the contenders. They were unconvincing in their 1-0 win over Haiti in their first game, and their pre-tournament form wasn't the best, but still they have experience of going late into tournaments and ultimately getting over the line. And of course, Australia, but they're missing Sam Kerr, who is missed their first game and maybe will miss their second game as well through injury. If they can get her back fit and in the team, then they have a good chance of going on and winning on home soil.
All right, I see. Now, Steve, I believe this will be last question on Women's World Cup. So Australia, the co-host of the Women's World Cup, along with New Zealand, has been critical in terms of the gender disparity in World Cup prize money and the fact that some nations do not even have collective bargaining rights. Now, what are the details of this issue and what conditions need to improve for female footballers?
Yeah, I think this might be a little bit off topic, but when it comes to this specific conversation, what I find a little, I think disturbing is not the right word. I think uncomfortable is more like it. It's that for Korea specifically, we're not even ready to have this discussion, to be honest with you. And what I mean by that is 10 years ago, Korea had close to 2,000 registered female footballers across the country. And we now have about half of that, a little more than half of that. So this is a cultural failure, in my opinion. Forget about the game today, losing to Colombia. A day before the game, I wrote a preview that was read by 250,000 people on Naver, Korea's biggest sports portal, news portal. Well, more than half of the reader comments on that story, it was literally blatant hatred towards our own players, and for absolutely no reason. And this was before losing today. So as weird as this may sound, the fact that countries like Australia and the US are even having conversations about gender inequality and equal pay in sports across all genders, that alone puts them ahead of Korea. Because for female Korean athletes, they haven't even started their fight against inequality because what they're still dealing with is pretty much, institutionalized stigma. And that's something we got to think about because a lot of the rest of the world is fighting against gender inequality in sports. But we're not even ready to start that fight yet, to be honest with you.
Right, I see your point, and I cannot agree more that we should think about the improvements that we can make for the women's football team. All right, now, Paul, moving on to the men's soccer. Recently, versatile midfielder Lee Kang-in brought his talents to Paris Saint-Germain, while defender Min-jae joined the team German football giants Bayern Munich. Now, how surprising was it to see such big-name football clubs to sign these Korean players, and what do you expect from these players at their new clubs?
Well, I wouldn't say surprised because those two in particular are very talented. It's been very clear for a number of years that they were supposed to be destined for the very top. I think in the case of Lee Kang-in, it's more of a pleasant surprise that he signed for Paris Saint-Germain because there were a number of teams linked to him, even sort of in Spain where he'd played before, even in England as well with Aston Villa. But Paris Saint-Germain, that's the team that he chose, and he's got a genuine chance of winning the league most years. But for Paris Saint-Germain, their project with their owners is to win the Champions League. And obviously they brought in players like Mbappe and Neymar and Messi just until last year. And the aim was to win the Champions League. Now they're trying to go in a different way. They're bringing in some more younger players and try and build it that way. But in terms of what we can expect from him, he's now got the stage to show just how good that he is. It'd be a different kind of expectation than what he's had before in Spain, especially with Real Mallorca, not the biggest club. Valencia were obviously a very, very big club, but they weren't quite reaching the same heights that they used to 10, 15 years ago. But now it's time for him to sort of really show what he's capable of. As for Min-jae, well, even in 2017, when he broke into the Jeonbuk first team at the age of 20 or 21, it was very clear just how good he was. He was linked to a move to the Premier League in, about 3 or 4 years ago, before he went to Beijing. Some were kind of worried that that might have sent him on the wrong course towards Europe. Luckily for him, it worked out quite well. He went to Fenerbahce in Turkey. And then once he had that really great first season with Fenerbahce, we realised, yeah, he is the real deal. He got that big move to Napoli. And it was such a surprise, I think, with what happened at Napoli, because it was their first league title in Italy for nearly 30 years, or just over 30 years. And they won it so convincingly. And Kim Min-jae was a huge part of that. So he had lots of choice, I think, or he could have probably picked any team in Europe that he wanted to go to. Manchester United were supposed to be interested, but I think they had budget issues. They had to buy a new goalkeeper and a new striker and a midfield player, so they probably weren't ready to sort of plump for Kim Min-jae. But in Germany, he'll have a chance to win the Champions League. They won it only a few years ago, Bayern Munich, whereas PSG haven't ever won it. But Bayern Munich have, and he'll probably win the Bundesliga most years. It's really great to see that these two players have different paths to where they've ultimately ended up, the sort of very top of European football. But it's nice to see they've both gone to really, really big clubs and can win some silverware as well.
Right, so talented players indeed, and a lot to expect. Now, Paul, but they are not the only ones who signed with big-named football clubs, right? A Scottish club Celtic has also signed Yang Hyun-jun and Kwon Hyuk-kyu, who follows the Oh Hyung-kyu's footsteps after his transfer to the Scottish club back in January. Now, could you tell us more about the Scottish League and what role of the Korean players do you expect them to play?
Yeah, well, in terms of Celtic, they have a bit of history with Korean players because Ki Sung-young and Cha Jae-ri were both there in, I think it was 2010, 2012, and they won the league title there and a few other trophies as well. Very, very big club, one of the two biggest clubs in Scotland. In terms of league titles, they've won more than their crosstown rivals, Glasgow Rangers. But their previous manager, Ange Postecoglou, he is now at Spurs, but he has, because of his time in Australia and in Japan, he had this really good knowledge of signing players from Asia, in Japan and Korea. Because obviously teams like Celtic, where they will have to look at trying to find good young players, but for bargain prices, they've obviously targeted Japan and South Korea. Even though he's left the club, they obviously still have identified this as being a really good model to follow in terms of their transfer sort of tactics and stuff like that. But obviously, Oh Hyung-kyu went there in January. He's been a bit part player, more of an impact sub-role, but he's made an impact. He's scored goals. And I think because of the success that he's had in Scotland with Celtic, it's opened the door then for Yang Hyun-jun and Kwon Hyuk-kyu. Yang Hyun-jun is a bit more experienced. He has been playing for Gangwon's first team in K-League 1 for the last 18 months. Kind of rose to stardom after the All-Star game last year. He embarrassed a few Tottenham players in his performances. And really, he's a very exciting young player. And I think going to Celtic is a really good stepping stone into Europe. If you can play at a big club like that with big expectations, different from what they will have experienced before, they're playing in the Champions League as well.
Right.
Because they won the Scottish League title. That puts them straight into the group stage of the Champions League. So everything's there for these players to sort of learn and maybe put themselves in the shop window for a move to the Premier League. That happened with Key. Obviously, he went to Swansea after his time at Celtic. So good first step into Europe. And I think even Kwon Hyuk-kyu said that in an interview this week. Perhaps shouldn't have said that, really, that he sees Celtic as like a stepping stone, but he's kind of right. And yeah, we'll see how they both do.
All right, I see. Now, Steve, it seems more and more Korean players are getting opportunities at big clubs abroad. Now, could you tell us the reasons behind the recent recognition of Korean football players?
Well, I think it's important to kind of ask ourselves, is this a trend or a select few cases of exception? Because we look at a player like Lee Kang-in. You know, he's a player who lived in Spain since he was 10 years old. And we look at a player like Kim Min-jae, who grew up in Korea, but he took this unorthodox route of playing through the university and then, you know, making his senior debut in a third division of Korean football pyramid before his career just started to take off. And, you know, these two players have simply been exceptions to the trend. And they really got to where they are today by bucking the system, to be honest. And you go back and look at a player like Park Ji-sung. He made his professional debut in the second division of Japanese football. And you look at a player like Son Heung-min, barely even played competitive football in Korea before he moved to Germany at age 15. I think the question is, more and more Korean players joining big-name European clubs. These are simply a result of individual players finding ways to buck the trend. So give them all the credit in the world. But, Korea as a footballing country, we've done a lot. We've come very far, but there's still a lot more to do.
Right, I see still more things that we need to do. All right, now, Paul, I believe this will be our last question. So the draw for the group stages of the European Champions League is going to take place in August, and expectations are really high right now because we have Lee Kang-in and Min-jae at big-name clubs in the competition. Now, so far as I know, former Manchester United player Park Ji-sung was the only Korean player to win the title, right? What are the chances of another Korean player to win this medal? Could you briefly tell us?
Yeah, well, I think the fact that both of those two players are at genuine contenders for the UCL title is that we have probably a better chance than ever before than a Korean player to go on and do what Park Ji-sung did. And, at Bayern Munich, Thomas Tuchel is their coach. He's won the Champions League before. He's done it before. And Min-jae's experience at Napoli will help him. Obviously, he had a very good season with Napoli, and he played in the Champions League as well. So that experience will definitely help him. Of course, it depends on the draw. Both of those two teams are seeded, so they're in pot 1, and they will get drawn against teams from pots 2, 3, and 4, so therefore supposedly weaker teams. So they will be probably the strongest teams in their group. It is luck of the draw, obviously, and we'll see what kind of a draw that they get. But, yeah, we definitely, I think, probably have the strongest chance that we've ever had of having a Korean player go on and do what Park Ji-sung did.
Good to hear that. Let's wait and see. All right, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Paul. And thank you, Steve, for your insights and your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Now that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching and goodbye.